Hey everybody, it's Alexander Dahl with Manifest Brutality again. This week I have a discussion topic that I want to put a little bit of discussion into and encourage everybody to chime in on what they think and what they've been through. I had just recorded this video and discovered that I had forgotten to turn my microphone on, so here I am re-recording this video. So the topic I want to discuss is environment, and what I mean by that is where we record, where we do our production, and how that kind of impacts us. And the reason that I'm kind of bringing this up is many years ago I was working in a band with a couple guys, and one of them wanted to bring in mood lighting into the practice studio that we were recording in. And it was a good idea. I didn't exactly, understand why he wanted to do that. So I asked him about that, and he was essentially on the page of that sort of mood lighting. It helps provide an environment that is conducive to recording and conducive to being creative, and it changes kind of the mind state of when you walk in there because it's a different environment. So it kind of tricks your brain into thinking that that's the time to be creative. And many years after I left that band, I happened to play a show where they were also playing, and that same guy that gave me that answer pointed at two random people in this empty bar that we were playing in and told them to fight each other to the death. And so that was his idea of being creative, I suppose. But so that brings me to how my production and the way that I've developed my space to be conducive to the way that I produce. And of course, everybody's going to have their own distinct workflows, and what works best for them might not work so well for somebody else. When I first started recording, I was recording in the basement of a house that I was renting out. It was very low key. All I had was a computer, a mixer, and some speakers, and a couple 57s. So I didn't have the best setup, and I made do with what I had. That went through a couple different iterations of how I felt best that it would work. Eventually I picked up an electronic drum set, which I still have today. All I've replaced on it is a couple of the cymbal pads and then also the brain. And then from there I moved into another house that I was renting the basement out of, and in that house there was a dedicated room that I had specifically for all my equipment, and that room also went through a couple different iterations and arrangements of how I felt the equipment worked best and flowed best for the room. And so it had its own sense of what was to be accomplished in there, and that was actually the house where FC was recorded, and a couple other albums as well. That began essentially this path of finding the best environment and a more suitable, motivating environment to actually produce music in. From there, I moved into an apartment by myself, and I lived in that apartment for about 5 years. And that was probably one of the best places that in my adult life I lived. And many people say that the first time that they truly live on their own is the best experience that they have away from childhood, which for me, I can definitely say was great. The downside to it, though, was since it was a small 650 square foot one bedroom apartment, my living room and my recording studio and my practice space were all the same room. So I had a futon with a coffee table set up, and then a screen that was for my gaming computer, which isn't so much a up-to-date gaming computer anymore, but it was a dedicated computer specifically for something other than recording. And that computer in itself has gone through several iterations and hardware updates, but it is on an outdated architecture at this point. And then I had a dedicated recording computer, which was a refurbished Dell computer that I gutted all of the bloatware out of and reduced Windows down to what it needed to be in order to run Pro Tools exclusively with MBox 2. And that computer was the computer that I recorded maybe 5 albums on. And that computer, working in the space with the speakers and all of the other equipment that I had, contributed to the overall environment that I was working in. And that environment is kind of what tipped me over the edge of seeking a prime environment that was motivating and creative. And that apartment went through maybe 8 or 9 different iterations until I found the best arrangement of all of the furniture and everything that I had to actually be conducive for everybody in there. Everybody had enough space, maybe not a comfortable space, but enough space. And we were able to do live recording in there. Luckily, I had really good neighbors, so they didn't really mind the fact that I was, pushing decibels. And then towards the end of that, for the past year and a half there, I found the peak setup for that. The best it was going to be. Maybe it wasn't the best, but for that space, it was the best it was going to get. And then my fiance and I moved into this house about a year and a half ago. And so I was back in the basement. Granted, my apartment was garden level, so it was on the basement. So every recording studio I've ever had of my own has been in a basement. And so in this environment, I have everything set up really well that works with the way that I like to produce. And I've upgraded my computer, so now I have a dedicated recording computer running Pro Tools 12. And then I'm using an 11 rack as my audio interface, which it works for me. At the price range that I got everything for, it couldn't be beat. I couldn't say no to it, especially with the custom built PC that I made for it. I have a couple accelerators in there to boost the performance of it. But aside from that, I have my electronic drum set up over here, and then my guitars over here. My rig and my computer and everything is directly in front of me here. And then I have my microphones, and then I have an inbound mixer set up here so I can tweak with it when I'm doing vocals. And then all of my live recording amps and stuff over here. So when I'm working on a new progression or something, a new song, I'm able to set it up in Pro Tools, set a progression, tempo, whatever I think is the direction that I want to go in. And then I can step over to my drum set and organically develop the drum part for it, what I think would fit best for the song. And if I want it quantized, I can quantize it in Pro Tools, or if I like it a bit with some movement to it, I can just leave the raw audio. Typically, for the type of music and not the genre, and that's an entirely different topic we'll get into in a different video, is genre and criteria. For the stylization, I should say, for the Manifest Brutality project, since I like to kind of think of it as a little bit on the sci-fi ledge, I think quantized drums kind of fits that stylization. Not always, and it depends on the style of the song, but for the most part, I think that's generally the way that I go, because I like things to be nice and tight on the drums. And that's just me as a drummer, and that is an entirely opinionated thing that any drummer may have a differing opinion on. But for me, I like to have my drums exactly on the beat that I know they're supposed to be on. So this arrangement for me works really well, and this is already the third iteration in a year and a half that I've had of this recording studio, of changing things around and making it fit the way that I like it. So the reason that environment is important, and the reason that you take the equipment that you're using seriously, is because those are the things that kind of set forth in your mind to create the motivation and the exploration to develop new music. And as I've said before, we're constantly developing new material, and that's one of the reasons why, is because I like to emphasize the importance of that environment and to make sure that everything is conducive and supports creativity. So that's kind of my general discussion about environment and how it impacts us. So share your stories. How has environment impacted you, and whether it be positive or negative? Comment them, share them. Same with the previous topics that I've discussed. Any topics that I bring up on this channel are always welcome, whether it be the previous one I did about oversaturation of the music market, or our audition stories and follies of what have happened interacting with other musicians. And down the line, I'll share more of mine. So that wraps up our discussion portion. As a bit of an update for what I brought up last week about the song that I have ready for collaboration, that is out on the Manifest Fatality SoundCloud page, and I will also post it to the subreddit for bedroom bands to see if anybody on there wants to put some parts on there. And I'm probably looking for a guitarist and a bassist to do some parts on there, since I already did piano and drums for it. So we'll get that going, and then I think that kind of wraps up this video, and I'll see you guys next week. Have a good night.